Hello again. Well, I was away on holiday in Ontario. I did some crate digging while I was there and found about 50 albums. A lot of these are albums to fill in gaps in the collection. Some of them are like where they were the last album by an artist that I was missing. So I'll spread this out over 3 shorter videos instead of one really long video to make it easier to watch. And I've put these in alphabetical order to make things easier for me to sort. The first album is John Anderson's second solo album called Song of Seven. This was to complete my John Anderson collection. But I like John Anderson. I love Yes. So this was a nice one to find. I didn't pay big money for most of these, that's for sure. But nice album cover. Atlanta Rhythm Section, 3rd Annual Pipe Dream. This one completed my collection of 70s Atlanta Rhythm Section albums. It's in the original shrink wrap, and on the corner it came from, in Canada we used to have a chain of record stores called A&A's that were owned by Columbia Records at one time, and they went out of business I think in maybe the late 80s or early 90s. And this one was originally $5.89 at A&A Records. I really like the cover on that. And it has their hit called, I think it was called Doraville. This is the last Badfinger album that I needed for the collection. I have all the other albums. This was the last album that they recorded for Apple Records, and the record was called Ass. It didn't have any big hits on it, but it's not a bad album though. I used to see these in delete bins all over the place. Not that long after this album was released, when they moved to Warner Brothers, this Badfinger album used to be all over the place. So you see this one has a drill hole in it, so it was a delete at one time. Badfinger went on to record 2 more albums with, while Pete Ham was still in the band, that were on Warner Brothers, and they're both excellent albums as well. Berkeley James Harvest, once again. Prog rock, great stuff. This is a British copy, an original British copy on Harvest. Nice cover. And this is their second album, I think 1971. And what I like about this one is the fact that it has what might be the closest thing they had to a big hit in the early 70s. It was a tune called Mockingbird. It's just a fabulous record. This is an odd one. I found this in the Beach Boy section of a store. The 2 stores that I went to in Ontario that were really good stores, I'll give them some credit here. Cops Collectibles, who have been around since the 1970s, but they now have 4 stores in the Greater Toronto area, 3 in the city and 1 in Oshawa, and I went to the Oshawa store. The other store I went to was called 33 1/3, and they're in Aurora, Ontario, north of Toronto, and it's a new store, relatively new store. I think it's been around for maybe 2 or 3 years, I don't know, but it was a very good store, nice people, clean store. Some nice records there. And this is a Beach Boys record called The New Album, Fall 1976 Collector's Series. I think this is kind of a professional looking bootleg. The material on the album is outtakes, like My Diane, Marilyn Ravel, Hey Little Tomboy, Ruby Baby, Moni Moni on Broadway, and some of it's from an album that was never released, maybe by Brian Wilson in the mid-60s. It says Made in Canada on it though, and unless I say otherwise you can assume that these records were all made in Canada. This is the last Beach Boy album that I was missing from their 60s and 70s stuff. It's called Horizontal. It was the Bee Gees' second album, and it has a lot of psychedelic influence on it. The first 2 Bee Gees albums are kind of light, soft psych rock, similar to the Beatles. The hits on this one were World, I think, which was a minor hit, and Massachusetts, which was a big hit. Cilla Black. This is her first greatest hits album, and this is a UK pressing. on EMI Parlophone, and produced by George Martin. It's a stereo copy, which is very nice, and it has three songs that were written by the Beatles but not recorded by the Beatles. They were acted as her songwriters when she was getting started. It also has Anyone Who Had a Heart, which was a Burt Bacharach hit that she had in the UK, and it's a good find. Now, Cilla Black went on to become just a very popular entertainer and TV host in the UK. I remember when I lived in the UK in the 80s, she was hosting shows that were similar to The Dating Game, where a couple would be set up to go out on a date, and they'd come back to the studio afterwards and they'd start slagging each other and stuff, and it was it was kind of funny stuff. Zip-diddy-doo-dah. This is Bobby Sox and the Blue Jeans, and I picked this up for its rarity and because of the cover is all kind of cute. It's a cartoon cover, produced by Phil Spector. It's a Phil Spector release, essentially. It's on the Phillies label. Nice cartoon cover, and there's Darlene Love. This is one of the singers in this group. Very interesting to see. I'd never seen that record before in the wild, and it was very inexpensive. Buckingham's Time and Charges, which I think is their first LP that they recorded on Columbia Records. I have their first album, which was on a label from Chicago, I think. This one features the hit Don't You Care, and also Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. This is a reissue of Johnny Burnette and the Rock and Roll Trio, Tear It Up, 17 Wild Rockabilly Classics. Johnny Burnette was a peer of Elvis Presley. He was also from Memphis, and he was recording in 1956-57 in a rock and roll trio format like Elvis, Scotty, and Bill. And they recorded hit versions of Honey Hush and Train Kept A-Rollin', amongst other songs. This is an album I had in the 70s, and somewhere along the line it went missing. I don't know if I sold it or whether somebody stole it. But it has great liner notes. It's on the Solid Smoke record label. Nice pictures and liner notes inside. If you like rockabilly and old-time 50s rock and roll, it's an essential to listen to Johnny Burnette. It's great stuff. This one I picked up on speculation. I had no idea what it was like. Chick Churchill, You and Me. Now, Chick Churchill is the keyboard player in 10 Years After, and this was released in the early 1970s, but it wasn't around very long. Climax Blues Band, one of their early LPs, it's called Rich Man. It's on the Sire label. And I think this is an import. Climax Blues Band, Sense of Direction. This is a Canadian copy on GRT, and it's still sealed. I think it was only $4 or $5. I like their early stuff, which was more bluesy. This is an album I was very happy to find because I have a couple of their other albums. Cold Blood, Lydia Pence, vocalist, who was kind of a Janis Joplin sound, I suppose. This is their first album. It's on the San Francisco, kind of the Fillmore label. I think might have been owned by Bill Graham or something. But the hit, if there was a hit on this, it was You Got Me Hummin'. It's a great album. They have a horn section, kind of like Blood, Sweat, and Tears or Chicago, but they've got the great vocals of Lydia Pence as well. It's a super album. I've been looking for that one for years. Lonnie Donegan, Putting on the Style. This is Lonnie Donegan, the great British kind of folk artist, I suppose folk or whatever. And this has many guest stars on it, like Ronnie Wood, Rory Gallagher, Ringo Starr, Mick Ralphs, Elton John. It was released in the 1970s. Focus. This was the only Focus album that I didn't have of all their early albums. It's called Ship of Memories, and apparently it's an album of outtakes and recordings that they hadn't released previously, with Jan Akkerman on guitar, Tis Van Leer on flute and keyboards, I think. And the last of this set will be Genesis Seconds Out, which I think is the only Genesis album that I didn't have. And it's quite a good one. It's a double live album after Peter Gabriel left the band and Phil Collins had taken over on vocals. And it's a nice live release. Thanks for watching.